Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining me on another edition of CBT Now right here at CBT News. eLEND Solutions recently conducted a study of the vehicle purchase process comparing initial payment term quotes to consumers to actual auto lender decision data. Joining me now to discuss it further is Pete MacInnis, CEO of eLEND Solutions. So thank you so much, Pete, for joining me on the show today.
Jim, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Sure. So let's first start off. What was your rationale for doing this study?
Yeah. So, obviously, you've had me on the show so many times, and we've always talked about some of the other surveys and things that we've done around dealer sentiment, around payment quotes and all that stuff. And we've had a lot of data in the past about that. So we really wanted to drill down and say, you know what, we've got a lot of survey data, but let's really try to dig into some data. And what we saw was we wanted to look at these initial payment quotes that consumers were getting during that vehicle shopping buying process. And what they were derived from was this legacy out-of-date loan pricing models that are based on like these FICO credit tier bands. So say, for example, a customer with a 720 credit score is getting quoted a payment at tier 1 rates, or like say a 680 credit score might be a tier 2. So that's really the legacy historical model of which most payment quoting today, whether it's a dealer's website, an automotive portal, a digital retailing tool, or even in a showroom, is still working off those legacy. Let's put a customer in a FICO tier band bucket, and that's where our initial quote will be. And so that's kind of the legacy model that the world is operating off of today in the industry.
Which can only frustrate the consumer, the sales staff, the F&I staff, and the bank for that matter.
Well, yeah, it's like, hey, you know what? Customer wants a payment up front that cares much about payments as price, so therefore let's give them one. And then we'll figure out later, how close or far off we are or what we need to do with that. So we thought that was intriguing. So what we did is, we looked at also that we know that auto lenders have moved away from that single attribute pricing model, of that credit score attribute to way more complex dynamic pricing models that look at many attributes down to that individual customer qualification level. So a couple of examples will be, so instead of a one attribute 720, you get this interest rate, a lender might say, okay, well, we want a 720 credit score. We want you to have X number of years on the credit report. We want Y high credit on there. We want your revolving debt not to exceed Z. And then we're going to look at debt to income ratio, payment to income ratio, loan to value ratio, front end advance, back end advance. Are you a customer of ours currently? Are we going to do auto pay? And it could go down like an endless number of attributes, and they're all different and dynamically different by each lender. Well, none of that is present in the current pricing model today. And so we really thought, okay, there's a complete detachment from each other of those models and reality. So we really wanted to see what that impact was.
Yeah, for sure. So share some numbers with us. Let's share some percentages of those people that were approved.
Yeah, so what we did is we looked at thousands of credit applications that were submitted, and to over 100 different lenders who return loan decisions for those applications. So the first thing we did is said, so it was. So yeah, it's enough to get at least a snapshot of what we think is going on in the marketplace. So probably to no one's surprise, the initial thing we said, okay, well let's drill down into the ones that were approved. Well, of those, 32% of them received an approval. So we said, okay, basically a third get approved. That's submitted by a consumer request submitted by a dealer to a lender. Okay, one third gets approved. All right, then we said, okay, well, let's drill into these approvals and see how many of those were approved as in the way it was submitted, meaning the lender approval of the monthly payment, term, and down payment matched the original request of monthly payment, term, and down payment that was submitted by the dealer. So those three key attributes were the most important ones. What monthly payment are we looking for, at what term, at what down payment?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to see is how often does the lender's approval match those three elements?
Right.
So would you like to guess at what that percentage of those where the lender matched it up exactly as requested? What percentage? Or do you want me to tell you?
25%.
1.6%.
1.6%?
That was it.
Oh my God. That's crazy.
Right. So what happened? They might have approved it.
Yeah.
But but they didn't have all three elements consistent. So it was like, well, maybe the payment was due because it was a different interest rate. Remember, the customer might have went from a tier 1 to a tier 2 or 3 or something of that nature, or the lender might have said, hey, we'll approve the deal, but we're going to cut this thing back to 48 months from 60 because of maybe the vehicle's got, too many miles or whatever. Right. So they're going to cut the term, or so the customer might be qualified, but there's something maybe that they don't like about the vehicle, or they'll do the deal, but they want a different down payment or more down payment.
Right.
So when I say it was only 1.6%, there was always a difference of the combination of one of those elements or up to all three were different.
Wow.
So
wow.
We couldn't get down to say,
nuts.
It's like I'm saying, the as is, like, hey, you submitted this way, it's golden.
Yeah.
It was almost never happened.
That is crazy. So I mean, that's got so many implications and ramifications, I should say, in the overall deal structure, and also the attitude and the sentiment of those customers that are working with that dealership, right? And I mean, that has just got such a ripple effect.
Yeah, when you've been kind enough to have me on your show before, when we did some survey data and we asked questions to dealers about is the payment accurate or is it not, and stuff like that, and the dealers told us, like, well, no, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, so what we did is in the lender data, we said, well, let's find out how much. Well, what's the real number? And what it turned out was the average lender approval monthly payment was $36 per month higher than what the initial quote to the customer was.
Wow. Wow.
And Jim, it did not include, in a lot of cases, there was additional down payment asked for by the lender, and that did not include dealer markup. So if you want to make dealer back in, you got to overcome the $36 to begin with before you can add on to that to make some dealer participation.
Of course, of course.
That was in the data that we looked at and that we saw, those thousands of apps with over 100 different lenders. That was the conclusion. We sliced and diced it 15 different ways to come up with a different answer, and we couldn't get one.
That is totally amazing, and it's also unacceptable in 2025 when we're talking about every retailer out there wanting to capture more of that Amazon experience for consumers, not just in products, but or I should say in everywhere else other than automotive, but now in automotive. I mean, you know, dealers have got to be confident in the numbers that they put together for consumers. This is not going to get us to where we need to be in this industry, right?
Yeah, and we're hypersensitive to that information, that data. We said, you know what, this is our analysis. This is what we're looking at. This is what we're seeing.
Sure.
We're not trying to scream Armageddon.
Yeah.
Or blame the industry. We're just saying, hey, this is what the data's telling us.
Right.
So what we wanted to do with that is we thought, you know what, let's see, now that we have this data, let's share some of the high-level parts of, like we're talking about today, and then say, hey, why don't we do a survey, an industry survey, whether it's dealers, F&I companies, agents, lenders, whoever has a vested interest in this, this entire ecosystem of the transaction of buying and selling a vehicle. Let's put out a survey to them and say, hey, based on this data, we want to know what you think. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to put forth some series of questions to them to say, hey, what's your thoughts on this? Yeah.
Can you give us a few examples of the type of survey questions that will be asked?
Yeah. So, start out really simply, right? So, hey, asking it, do most initial customer payment quotes by dealers, do they actually match the lender final approval terms? It's a simple yes or no
Right.
question.
Right.
And then maybe we'll drill a little deeper and we'll get into that question. Like, for example, on used vehicles, when we said the average monthly payment was $36 higher than the initial quote to customer, does this match your experience? Whether
Right.
you're an F&I, a salesperson,
Sure.
a trainer, yes or no, and then it might ask a follow-up question, right? So what we're trying to do is get into the middle of that and say, okay, based upon those answers, there'll be additional questions that, like, okay, well, what's the impact of that? Front end, back end, and all that type of stuff.
Right.
But then we get back down into the end of it. We want to say, okay, we've identified a problem, and what's causing that? So there'll be a couple questions about, like, for example, we know that. The question would be, can you estimate the percentage of lenders who have stopped providing those standard rate sheet bulletins? The guiding factor of telling a dealer guidance, hey, this is how you pay quote payments.
Yeah.
Well, what percentage of the audience says, how many of those do they believe lenders have stopped doing that?
Mm-hmm.
We wanted that assessment. And then the follow-up question would be, and what percentage of the car sales do you estimate are actually financed under standard rate programs that you don't get guidance on?
Right.
Right. So what it does, it goes full circle back to the point of, can we validate the sentiment of the industry
mm-hmm.
to the data that we saw to illustrate, like, here's what we thought was the problem. We wanted your input and your experiences so that we can start to drill down into some of those questions being around, how's that impact, front end sales, gross,
right, right,
F&I, contract penetration. What's those financial impacts? We wanted to get enough data that we could determine, like, okay, what is the financial impact of this?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And as you know, the first thing that the consumer hears is, I'm going to need a bigger discount. I'm going to need to be put more in the trade. I'm going to need for the dealer to do something to get me to the payment that I want to get to, right? Which is
mm-hmm.
which is the first area that is attacked under a situation like this.
Correct. Yeah. So if we come back and we're able to get enough participation in this survey, we'll have those results.
Right.
And we'll come back and say, hey, these are the findings, right?
Yeah.
This is the impact to front end, back end,
mm-hmm.
Friction reduction, time savings,
CSI,
for both consumer, dealer, CSI, you betcha, all that type of stuff.
That's right. That's right. I think it's a very important topic, and we're here at CBT News. We're asking all of our audience to participate in this survey. I think it's going to be great feedback for all of you. When you have the results of the survey, will you come back on the show to share with our audience the results, Pete? Because I think that this is the kind of information dealers need.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that survey data will drill down into the real dollars impact, front end, back end gross profit.
Good.
When these initial payment term quotes don't match those lender decision data. Yeah. So I really look forward to sharing those results, and I appreciate CBT News and our audience for participating in this very important survey that we want to help bring awareness to the market.
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question about it. eLEND has identified a serious disconnect, as you can see here, between initial payment quotes, and lender final loan decisions. Your participation in this finance survey will really help to quantify the financial impact of the vehicle sales, as Pete was just pointing out, and the profits. So please click onto the link right here on our homepage. Complete the survey. Do me a favor, do yourself a favor, and complete the survey. We will share the results with you here at CBT News and discuss strategies to improve the car buying and selling process that protects the dealer profits at the end of the day. So we're all in this thing together. Pete's put together an incredible survey. We can help him distribute it, I should say, and get your participation. So it's all of you that make the difference. It won't take long. It'll take a few minutes to complete the survey, and I promise you we'll share the results of it, which I think is going to be really, really necessary information for you to get your hands on. So whether it be on our homepage or whether you see an email coming across your email, address with the survey enclosed. Take the time, do me a favor, and fill out the survey. And then, as I said, Pete's already committed to coming back and sharing all the information with us. So, Pete MacInnis, founder and CEO of eLEND Solutions, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Very much appreciate it. Appreciate the fact that you've allowed us to play a role in this, and I can't wait to see the results.
We're looking forward to it, Jim. Hey, it's a 5-minute survey, and it's not like taking an SAT. You know,
That's right.
It's very pinpointed to the audience, and it'll be easy for them to do. And we really appreciate your help getting that word out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Happy to do it, and hopefully dealers are happy to participate in it. As he said, it only takes 5 minutes, but I know you're going to love to see the results. So, Pete, thanks so much for joining us on the show. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.